Welcome to the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast. I'm Brandon Jaffe. Join us as we explore relationship and mental health issues by weeding out the trends in the mental health industry to uncover what truly works in improving our emotional well-being and relationships. At Inspired Resolutions Counseling, we specialize in providing interventions and resources for families with teens, focusing on topics such as teen mental health, parenting challenges, and family dynamics. Today's episode is inspired by a type of therapy session that I have had over and over again with parents, where parents find themselves trapped in this cycle of providing endless resources for their child, paying for things like internet, gas, and a whole bunch of other things, without clear boundaries. And in the process of the tug and pull and arguments and trying to parent and trying to teach and using consequences, inadvertently, a lot of parents end up enabling their child in terms of responsibility. And over time, there's a resentment that builds on both ends and an erosion of trust because for some reason, the lack of boundaries, the arguments, and the lack of responsibility on the child's end turns into a trust issue for many human beings, parents, and families. I want to take a look at some pretty specific concepts. Number one is setting healthy boundaries. Number two is recognizing and addressing enabling behaviors. And then understanding the resentment as an emotional warning sign. Encouraging what is called personal agency and maturity. Navigating emotional conflict in parenting. Avoiding the victim mentality. Denial. And then we're also going to talk about balancing self-care with expectations. I know a lot of families can identify with all of these topics. I'm hoping to plant some seeds. Let's start with boundaries. We often misunderstand boundaries as tools to control or change others. And in reality, they're designed to protect our own emotional health, our own resources. An example is, I will no longer pay for your internet, or I'm not going to cover your gas expenses if you're not contributing in other ways. And so those two boundaries become kind of a sticky, splitting hairs issue for parents because at the heart of it, they often just want their child to change. Remember, protection, not change. When you set a boundary, the focus is on what you're willing or not willing to do. It's not about enforcing the other person to act differently. For instance, you might say, I'm happy to provide groceries for the household, but I won't pay for your premium streaming services because I'm building a resentment at the fact that you're not participating in productive ways towards the family or towards the house or doing chores or whatever it might be. It becomes a question of I'm not going to support certain things because you see them as extra or favors that you're doing. In boundary work, clarity and follow-through is really important. Boundaries only work when they are clear, consistently enforced, and they are meant, the spirit behind them is meant for protection. So let's say you set a boundary with chores. If the dishes aren't placed in the dishwasher, I won't wash them. If you break this rule, you don't have a way to follow through. What happens is you lose credibility and it becomes more chaos. It becomes more resentment building, right? The fact is, you can't force your child to put dishes in the dishwasher. And most parents are not going to prevent their children from eating and using dishes. But in this case, you often will kind of shoot yourself in the foot. It'll be counterproductive to not accept, hey, I'm either not willing or not able to set a boundary with this topic. I have had a few families over time who have this dishwashing issue and they put locks on their cabinets. Most parents aren't willing to do that. And quite honestly, the parents who have been willing to do that, it turned out quite well and actually made things more lighthearted. One thing I want people to remember is when you are not good at setting boundaries, start small. Pick one area. It might be the laundry. It might be the dishes. It might be any number of things, but communicate it kindly, communicate it clearly, enforce it calmly, and be patient with how it affects you and the dynamics that it will change in the long run. A lot of times parents set a boundary, follow through, and they go, see, nothing changed, and then they give up. Recognizing and addressing enabling behaviors is a really important skill for parents to keep honing. And this concept comes up repeatedly in therapy session. And I think we know the big ways to enable, giving money to an addict, etc. But it happens when you consistently provide resources, money, shelter, services, favors, whatever, without requiring any responsibility of the other person. And so there's other ways that we enable, but for the purposes of what I'm talking about, when it comes to that, I'm not going to allow this person in my life to be responsible because I don't think that they will be, or I don't want the chaos that comes with it, or I don't want them to suffer enough, or I don't want to set boundaries. What happens is, even though it's coming from a place of love or trying to protect moments and family, the enabling unintentionally stunts the growth of the family and the individual. If you find yourself routinely rescuing someone from natural consequences of their choices, like paying their bills, covering their chores for them, not setting the boundaries, you might be enabling. And it becomes sticky because for a lot of parents, it's, look, I enable because I got to move on. I got to get this done, or whatever it might be. Sometimes we really need help to figure out how to break the cycles of enabling. There's another concept that I've titled emotional conflict. Emotional conflict in enabling. Many parents fear that withdrawing support will lead their child to fail or resent them. And in the short run, you probably are right. This fear becomes the thing that perpetuates the enabling, and it perpetuates the irresponsibility. When you do that long enough, you got to understand that undoing that dynamic between you and your child takes a long time. A lot of times it's the parent's guilt lead to offering certain resources that become a part of the enabling of the irresponsible child. And it doesn't solve anything. It seemingly does in the short run, but sometimes you got to let your child be angry. The resentment is theirs to figure out, not yours to feel guilty about. You don't have power over their resentment, and nothing good comes from enabling. Remember that. It solves short-term discomfort, but it does not create healthy relationships. It does not create successful people. It does not create successful relationships. A good question for all parents to reflect on is, am I providing the resource or help because it's truly needed, or because I'm afraid of the confrontation or the guilt? And that answer will reveal whether or not you're enabling, or if you are genuinely supporting your child through a stage of their life. Because not all help and protection from them failing is enabling. Enabling is usually a pattern, not a one-off event. And that's important to remember, because I don't want you going after this podcast thinking that my message is any and all help that prevents them from suffering consequences is enabling. That's not true. It's the pattern and repeated perpetuation of protecting them from consequences that they have essentially chosen. Lack of boundaries, enabling, leads to something called resentment. The big resentments we can identify, sometimes parents are unaware of what I call subtle resentment. And it's kind of the silent killer of relationships. When we ignore our own needs, we fail to uphold boundaries, when we continuously give without reciprocation from the other person, resentment builds even if you're the happiest, most loving, and go with the flow person. It's sometimes subconscious. It's sometimes just right there under the surface and you don't recognize it. It doesn't always show up as yelling or anger, and it can be this simmer that you don't even recognize. And it builds tension that erodes away at the relationship and goodwill. It can be really damaging without you even realizing it. Honesty and taking a look at your own resentments, even if you don't think they're there, is going to be important. Building over time, a lot of parents don't realize that they've become frustrated. It builds over time. It's like a slow leak in a tire. You can kind of fill the tire up and you don't notice it. It's not until something major happens that you, oh my gosh, okay, now there is a slow leak. It's not the cold and the hot fluctuation. It's an actual leak. I have convinced myself I don't have a leak in my tire. Eventually, I have to realize, okay, well, now's the worst time to take care of this, but I have to take care of it because now it's a definite leak. And so we don't want that to happen with our resentments. We want to take care of them earlier than later. I think that a good exercise for all parents to do is take a moment each week to truly assess and be honest about how you're feeling, but also how maybe others would be feeling in your situation. Write down not just the grudges or frustrations that you have, but possible frustrations and grudges that would make sense to have given the situation that you're in. And again, address them sooner than later. And you address them by discussing it, coming up with solutions, reinforcing boundaries, asking for help. There's any number of ways to address these resentments that may be building. There's this concept called personal agency in our development as human beings. And when we provide for somebody's every need, regardless of their behavior, we get in the way of crucial life lessons. As humans, a lot of our growth happens because we have to deal with the good and bad outcomes of our decisions and knowing nobody's going to pick up after us all the time. If you have no motivation, for instance, to earn money, do chores, and things still go pretty well, maybe you don't have money all the time that you want, but you pretty much have everything you need and want. When you have a complete and utter safety net, what's a big difference between somebody who has that safety net and parents are helping them, but they're producing and they're productive. And there's this dynamic sometimes where parents are helping because the child's working towards something at any stage of life. But that's different than I'm not going to do anything and I still know that everything's going to be okay. What happens in that dynamic in the future is without accountability, people remain stuck. They never have the opportunity to learn to navigate challenges or solve their own problems independently. And while it feels good for all parties, maybe in the beginning, at some point, the parents aren't going to be able to pick up the slack. Allowing somebody to struggle can sometimes be the greatest gift that you can give them. It feels bad, it feels harsh, they get angry, but you cannot become resilient and responsible without suffering. You can't be taught it in a textbook, here's a lecture, now you have it type of way. You literally have to suffer in order to get it. I'll tell you this, it's better to learn those lessons with a safety net of mom and dad at 18 than it is to learn those things at 38 when there's possibly nobody. Really, I challenge you to remind yourself, this sucks to watch them go through this. I don't want to do this. It doesn't feel good. I feel guilty. However, this is better than them experiencing it at 38. And so another concept that goes with this is there's this thing called tough love. It's not about tough love. There's this emotional conflict that many parents, if not all parents, face, wanting to care for your child while also needing to step back. Some people call it tough love. I don't like that concept. Again, I'm going to use that word. It's allowing personal agency and maturity to happen. That is a much different concept. When you're always fixing things, you start to blur the lines. Fix things sometimes, but if the pattern is they never face real consequence, their growth is stalled, what happens is you are literally getting in the way, but you're also creating space for an unhealthy emotional dynamic in the relationship. You're creating space for this guilt, this frustration, this fear, this lack of trust. What happens is the message is, I don't trust you to handle this on your own. Every parent struggles with that emotional conflict of, man, I'm here. One of my purposes is to protect my child, love on my child. And it doesn't seem like you're being very loving. And you start feeling guilty. That's the emotional conflict. But then you're also frustrated and afraid that they're never going to learn their lesson type thing. And so you got to stick to what's healthy. There's 3 concepts I want to end on. The victim mentality versus agency, family dynamics and denial, and then navigating the family expectations and self-care. In therapy sessions, a lot of times I'll find that the child who's struggling sees themselves as a victim. They feel unloved, they're misunderstood, they're stuck because of unfortunate circumstances that are happening around them. And a lot of times parents will go with that until they get really, really angry. That victim mentality gets in the way of finding agency. This view is easy for parents to go along with and it's really easy for the child because it absolves them from any accountability. However, real change requires acknowledging personal power. It is so important to recognize I have choices. Some things I don't have choices about, but most things when it comes to myself, I do. And until you step back and don't buy into this victim mentality, your child cannot find agency. Denial often creeps up when acknowledging the truth feels too painful. Acknowledging the truth doesn't mean you're going to feel good about the dynamic of your child. And maybe a sibling or other family members refuse to see the real issues and they prefer to blame somebody else in line with you and with your child. But a lot of times, multiple people in the family will kind of jump on this denial road and this denial train. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage for the one parent to break the cycle, to get more honest about the dynamics, to get more honest about the problem at hand. That becomes difficult when you have this family dynamic of multiple members, both in the immediate family and outside, will jump on this denial train that gets in the way of healthy growth in the family. To navigate family expectations with self-care, with extended family, sometimes you might have to make decisions regarding enabling that break the family image that has always been insisted on and built in your family. And so a part of self-care is sometimes ticking off other people in the family who expect or think that you should be making certain decisions that are maybe unhealthy, but seemingly easier and better in the moment. We've got to find a way to balance these expectations of others in our life that we love and love us with self-care and healthy relationship building. Everybody's heard this, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you're not upholding your boundaries, despite what other people say, you're not going to have a full cup. This was kind of a lot of information jammed into a short amount of time. We discussed everything from the basics of boundary setting and the pitfalls of enabling to resentments and taking personal accountability. And if there's one really important message, boundaries protect you while guiding others towards growth, especially when it comes to your children. That mutual respect is not going to always be there, but it's more likely when you are healthy in relationship. Remember, boundaries are for your own well-being, not for somebody else to change. Enabling never results in healthy relationship and independence and maturity. Resentment is on you to figure out. And a lot of times it's because you're not upholding your boundaries. And resentment is the ultimate damager of relationships. Without accountability, and you can't force your child to be accountable, but without accountability, you cannot find personal growth. I hope that, like all my episodes, I hope I've planted some seeds. I've jammed a lot of information into a small amount of time, and I know each individual topic we could go on forever and ever. And we now have an online course. If you go to inspiredresolutionscourses.com, you can find it where we dive into this a little bit more in depth and weekly content gets brought out. It is subscription based. It helps us be able to have the free groups and the free podcast. I hope that this helped. I look forward to hearing some comments, and until next time.
The Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast is an Inspired Resolutions production. Hosted by Brandon Jaffe. Edited and mixed by Natalie Atkinson. Music by Natalie and Sean Atkinson. Inspired Resolutions Counseling is based in Yorba Linda, California. Whether you're interested in joining our group, seeking therapy services, or exploring more of our resources, you can find us on our website, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Inspired Resolutions Counseling.